All right. Welcome back, everyone. So today we have another kind of gruesome story. It seems like Numbers is one of the more violent books. And there's a lot of rebellion, and here is actually one of the most famous rebellions that we don't actually talk about all that much. And so I wanted to make sure we mention it, or when we were going through Numbers, it's important to stop at the Korhites and talk about the rebellion of the Korhites.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you know the story and you know the name, you'll find it pop up again and again and again in later parts of the Bible, where it will be a passing reference of the Korhites and their rebellion. So notably, we are kind of skipping over there's another set of rules that is in between what we did last week in chapter 14 with the talking about the people's response to being told to go to the land of milk and honey, them saying, oh no, and then trying to and then not. So the people are struggling at this moment. There's a bunch of rules, and I took the liberty to kind of graze over that and go and keep going with the story part of it.
Let me ask you, I skipped through it, but is one of the rules is if you say, I think this is a really scary thing to do, I don't want to do it, meaning that you're going to get killed? Is that one of the rules?
I will be honest, I didn't look at I set out our schedule a while in advance, and I just saw that it's like, oh, these are part of the law. We're gonna skip over them. The only one that's like kind of interesting is right before chapter 16, where it talks about the fringes of the garment, which comes into play. It's why the talit that Jewish folk wear, why it has fringe at the bottom. There's the rule. There's also some references in the Gospels about the fringe of Jesus's cloak. That's the rule, but I actually didn't read the rules in between.
Okay.
But yeah, Larry?
You said you keep referring to the Korhites.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they?
The Korhites are the followers of Korah, which is how you say the name of the person who led the rebellion in this week's chapter.
Okay, but wasn't it the whole of the Levites that were sort of objecting? Or was it just his followers?
That is up for debate.
Okay.
So we can talk about I was reading the commentaries, and there seems to be a bit of ambiguity here. So of course, once again, in some ways we have three stories smushed together, because there's actually three conflicts going on. Wrapped into with a nice little bow at the top with one story, but there's kind of three main conflicts that we will talk about.
Okay.
So with all of that introduction, what are some initial thoughts about this story of rebellion and punishment? Another story of rebellion and punishment.
Who needs Hamas if you have God? I mean, it's terrible. What is the matter with him? Moses tries to talk him down. You think last time, I read that, he talked him down and reminded he was supposed to be a loving God, and that's like he kind of forgot. He started doing it, burning people up again. I don't know what that all about. Is anyone?
Yeah, I mean, when you keep reading one story after another of all of this killing and so forth, and God says, well, get out of the way, I'm going to slaughter a few more of you. It sort of destroys your concept of what God is, Clearly, he's an avenging God in these stories.
The quote in last week's thing, which I wasn't here, but I went and read it, and the Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. What is that from? I was trying to find the reference to that. I looked on the bottom of my page and it didn't say.
So that's first said in Exodus. It looks like Exodus 34.
Okay, so
Um,
it's actually before this. Okay, I thought maybe it was from later on, like, okay.
So one of the things where you see it turn into kind of turn from prose to poetry, that normally means that it existed outside of the text. So that's one of the phrases where Moses says it in Exodus, but it's pretty clear that it was a well-known phrase or like little
Oh.
poem. It existed beforehand. So this is a commonly said phrase, which is why Moses is more evoking it rather than coming up with it.
I didn't think he was coming up with it because it was so familiar, but I couldn't find the reference.
It's repeated throughout scripture at various places. I believe it appears in, if I remember correctly, it appears in the Psalms a handful of times too. So it is a common phrase.
So the Hebrews thought it was too dangerous to go into the promised land. I don't know whether they distorted what they saw or not to explain why there's another 40 years in the wilderness.
Right. So this rebellion, oh, Gary, did you have a thought?
Well, I'm just going to remark that there's like 16,000 of them are not going to have to suffer for 40 years after this chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're counting them, huh?
So this rebellion is kind of in echo of the thought of going to the promised land, of not going to the promised land, and then some people try and get their butts handed to them. And so this is kind of a response to the almost entry into the promised land. And instead Moses is coming back saying we're going to wander for 40 years.
Oh, okay.
And it seems to be that that Moses's authority is now being called into question because of this kind of back and forth. And so just at the outset, does it seem semi-understandable that when your leader says do a scary thing and you say no thank you, and then says, well, the response is we're stuck in the wilderness until you die. You will never see like the good place. Does it seem understandable that the leadership might have questions about his sanity, his authority, his communication with God?
Yeah.
Just in like broad strokes, does that part of it seem understandable?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, what fascinates me is how short a period of time all of this is happening in. As far as I remember, I'm thinking this is maybe a year, a little over a year. Is that reasonable?
More or less, yeah.
And look at all the rebellions. Look at all of the conflict with the Lord. Look at all the people that the Lord has killed. I mean, they're going to be running out of people pretty soon. I would think that, he's getting rid of thousands at a time. So I don't know if this time period is reasonable. I don't know. It just seems like they're having a revolt every other month. So,
Well, this 40 years is to allow for the children to grow up.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
the old people to die.
For the adults to die, including Moses.
They've been out there a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. Now all of a sudden they're told, well, you're going to spend another 40 years. I can see why people might be a little upset by that.
Yeah.
That sounds like quite a sentence.
Except that, of course, they don't want to go in anyway because it's dangerous.
Yes.
It makes me think of do you all know the feeling of when you open the refrigerator and you look in because you're hungry and you want something to eat and nothing looks good, and so you close it and you go to the pantry and you open up the pantry door and nothing looks good, so you close it and you go back to the refrigerator and you open it up again.
See if anything changed.
Right. It almost feels like there's a sense that that's what these people are doing. They're like, they opened up the refrigerator and they're like, well, life in Egypt's not good, so we're going to close that. Let's open up the door to the promised land. Well, that's scary too. So let's close that and open up the refrigerator door again and see if anything looks better now. So they're kind of waffling, like nothing seems good. They're not happy with their leadership because, like, it's not just that they're spending 40 years in the desert. It's a life sentence for them. They are told that the reason why it's 40 years is because they are going to die in the wilderness. And I think that puts it in a little different of a perspective. Like, if you tell me that I'm going to stay in one spot for 40 years and then I'm going to go into like paradise, I'm hoping to live past 40 years from where I am now. So there's a hope at the end that I could actually enter. These people are not given that hope. They're saying this group of people is going to stay in the wilderness until you die.
Yep.
Well, Caleb and is it Caleb or and Joshua are exempt, but isn't Joshua going to be pretty old by the time he leads the group into Israel?
Uncertain. I'm going to leave that. I'll have to do some looking into. After Numbers comes Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is a whole different case unto itself, and we'll get to Deuteronomy. But in some ways, the book of Joshua follows after the book of Numbers, and so I don't actually know how old Joshua is supposed to be.
Okay. I always wondered why. I mean, I knew that Moses didn't go into the promised land, but I didn't know why.
Oh, we actually haven't gotten to that yet. At this point, Moses's ability to go into the promised land has not yet been revoked, believe it or not.
Well, he should be dead in 40 years. Okay. He hasn't been revoked. Okay.
Yeah, there's a very specific moment where Moses loses promised land privileges.
Okay.
And we'll get to that. So let's actually go to the text itself and talk about the three conflicts that are existing simultaneously in this. Two issues deal with Korah, and then the last issue deals with Dathan and Abiram, who are the sons of Elab, who are it took me some reading into. These are the leaders of the tribe of Reuben. So this is one of the biggest tribes, and these are the two leaders, and we'll get to them. So their situation is kind of different, but Korah has two complaints. So, do you remember a little while back, I told you to remember the name of Korah because the Korahites have a specific job. Do you remember me telling you to remember his name?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the Korahites' job is?
They're priests, aren't they?
Not quite.
I mean, temple helpers.
Yes.
Intermediaries.
I forget where it is. So what the Korahites' job is when they move camp, like everyone has a different task. Some people, it's like, okay, you're going to move the flock. Some people move your tent. There's different people for moving the tabernacle. The Korahites' job is to move the furniture in the tabernacle. So they have a very specific job.
Okay.
And so the question is whether the Korahites are a part of the tribe of Levi or if they're not part of the tribe of Levi. But at any rate, they do have a specific a specific task, and that's to move the furniture, the table, the altars, the incense burners. So they haul it all around. And so they have just been carrying all the pieces of the tabernacle from the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula to the top of the Sinai Peninsula.
Okay.
And so they get a bunch of, or Korah gets a bunch of men together. They go confront Aaron and Moses and Aaron. And Korah's complaint is, you have gone too far. All of the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. So why do you exalt yourselves above this assembly of the Lord? So where is the complaint in what he's saying?
It's
What is his?
against Moses, is it? Or
So it is against Moses, also Aaron, but what is the issue?
Well, they want to be priests like Aaron and so forth. So they're saying you are positioning yourselves above us and between God. So you're an impediment in our direct communication with the Lord.
Well, he always has been, isn't he? He's the only one that's been allowed into they have direct conversation with God.
Yeah, and now they're complaining about it.
So why would this group want to be priests?
Power.
Power, part of it, yeah. So what kind of power would being a priest give you?
Probably wouldn't have to carry that heavy furniture all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, it lets you speak to the Lord directly.
Are they priests doing that? Speaking
No,
to the
only Moses and Aaron, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's the twofold nature of this, where my notes were saying that there's kind of the two conflicts. One is saying that like the Levites have this elevated role. And so if the Korhites are not Levites, that would explain their rationale of the whole congregation is holy. It's saying you don't need to separate the Levites out to do these tasks. Everyone's holy, so everyone should have access to do this. And so it's like the question of like how consecrated, how sacred do you have to be to work in the temple? Everyone in the like the Lord is in the entire encampment, so can't anyone do these tasks? But then there's the other conflict of, well, the Levites are priests, but Aaron is, or all the Levites have like their duties in the tabernacle, but it's only it's Aaron and his sons that get to be priests who get to talk with God. So it's all, think of it more as an issue of the lesser Levites complaining that they're not higher ranking Levites who have the ability to talk to God. Yeah, Larry?
Shouldn't it be clear though, are the Korhites Levites or aren't they? They either are or they aren't, and they've been so specific about whose lineage you are in, I wouldn't think that would be a question.
It's more that they think two traditions have been combined here. And so that there's a tradition where they are Levites and there's a tradition where they're not. It's not an issue that they don't clarify later on. It's that they think there is two separate ones that, because they use the same name, they're kind of joining the issues together.
Well, they have a very good point. They're saying that this is not very democratic. I mean, if God is God, why don't we all have to him?
So today it almost seems like we're on the side of the Korhites. We want to talk to God directly ourselves, don't we?
But we think we can.
Mhm.
And people, I think. I don't know. What about Catholics? Do they just talk to God directly?
I believe if my understanding from my friends is correct, they do believe that they can talk to God directly. There's just also ways to talk to intermediaries.
Yes.
So I'm not an expert on Catholic theology, so I'm not going to fully answer that, but so my question again is, why now? Why now are the Korhites doing this? Why do they want this ability? Is it purely just that they are religious, and in the purity of their hearts they want to talk directly with God, they want to see God's face? Like, is it from a pure place, or like, why are they doing it, and why now? Kind of thinking back to the previous conflict we were talking about last week. Why do they want to do this?
Well, if they're gonna be stuck there for 40 years, they're trying to make themselves as comfortable as possible.
Mm-hmm. Fair. I'm wondering if they trust their leadership, or if they think Aaron and Moses have kind of gone off the rails, and so they want to get into the sanctuary and talk to God to verify that that is what God is saying. That's my own hypothesis. If you don't trust your leadership, you want access to power so you can be like, hey, God, did you really condemn us to 40 years in the wilderness? Come on, like, talk to us all. Like, stop talking through these two. I don't trust them. Talk to me. Verify if this is what you're saying or not.
Yeah, it's an awful message to hear that. But of course, this just makes God madder, and he really starts knocking people off.
Mhm.
You know, I've been wondering about all of the Orthodox men and super Orthodox men who are studying Torah all the time.
Mhm.
Do they come up with any new ideas about this? I mean, it's a full-time job. They must be. But
I mean, the traditional, I mean, the thing that I have heard my rabbi friends say all the time is, you have two people studying scripture and they'll come up with three opinions. So there is always, it's never that ideas are thrown out and never used again. It's more that they just keep compiling new ways to understand it.
I see.
If we're struggling enough with, I mean, if we want to, I can always, Rabbi Alicia said she would love to join us anytime, if we wanted to have her back again. If we want to ask some of these questions, I have no problem calling her back and saying, like, help us understand how you understand this.
Interesting, because she's very, I think that congregation is Reformed plus, isn't it?
Is what?
It's Reformed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for a woman to be a rabbi, it is inherently, or it is 9 times out of 10 a Reformed synagogue, just because those are the only ones allowing women to be ordained. Mary Ellen, what you're thinking?
Well, mentioning Rabbi Alicia, one thing that I really liked that she said regarding 3 interpretations with 2 rabbis, etc., is she said, you know, just take it back. I'm not quoting her. Just take it back to the core and what is the message here, rather than debating all the minutia. And I liked her comment. Just get to the core of the story and what are they trying to tell us, without, you know, getting caught up in all the legal details, etc. I would love to have her back. I really enjoyed her.
Yeah, it's a different way to look. Thank you for reminding us of that, of like the story in a way is a story that's trying to convey a message.
Yes.
That we can get like bogged down in the trees and the violence of it, but in the end, it's saying something about God. So I want to hold on to that question. I do want to dig through some of the complaints and the responses, but I do want to end with that question of like, what is the point of this story? So we have the 2 complaints of isn't everyone holy? Like, why do only some people have access? But also, why is it not just the Levites, but it's like this special sect in the Levites and this like one family? Like, it's a very small group of people that have direct access to God. Why and why not me, in a way?
Good
So,
question.
so the Korhites are confronting Moses and Aaron. Moses falls on his face, and his response is, in a way, like, okay, you want to burn incense in front of the tabernacle? Get some men and burn incense in front of the tabernacle, like, see what happens. And it's kind of like, in a way, Moses is just like, okay,
Go
do
for
it.
it.
See what happens. So what do you think of that response of like, go ahead. Ignore the boundaries I set up for you.
Okay. Do you think Moses has a pretty good idea what's going to happen?
What can you all think of a moment where something similar has happened that might give a taste of what is to come?
Hmm.
I think we went really quickly over it. And I forget if it's at the end of Exodus or if it's in Numbers. I am actually going to guess and say it's in Numbers. And we may have glanced over it.
Yeah, I think Moses knew what his guess. Yeah.
See, what happened, let's see, where is it? It is when Aaron and his sons are ordained as the priests. Two of his sons are ordained, and then like in the like hullabaloo of it all, in the excitement, two more of his sons burn incense when they weren't told that they should, and then they were burned alive. So we have seen one thing of where someone unqualified burned incense because two of Aaron's sons who weren't being ordained and didn't do the things burned incense, and they were seen as part, the understanding is they were seen as part of the sacrifice, and therefore they were burned up with the incense. So there has been a precursor to this. So Moses, in some ways, I'm wondering if he's like, well, when Aaron's unauthorized sons burned incense, it didn't go well, so like, have fun.
Yeah.
I think he should have warned them.
Theoretically,
If I were you.
I mean,
But-
theoretically, that ordination was in front of all the people. The Korhites would have seen this.
Okay.
So verses 5 through 7 are kind of addressing that initial complaint of Moses has two responses to kind of the combination argument where the Korhites are like, why not us? And then also like, why not the Levites? And so the second response is specifically to the group of Levites, in which he says, "Hear now, you Levites, is it too little that God has separated you out from the congregation of Israel, allowing you to approach him to perform the duties of the Lord's tabernacle and to stand before the congregation and serve them? And he has always allowed you to approach him and all your brothers of the Levites with you, yet you seek the priesthood as well. Therefore you and your company have gathered against the Lord. What is Aaron that you rail against him?" So this is kind of just like a rebuke of the Levites. So what do you think of this rebuke of, you guys are already special. Why are you not happy with your elevated status? So then the story shifts a little bit, and this little chunk is thrown in and isn't really referenced again. So just note that it appears like the commentators are saying it looks like the group of the Reubenites that's mentioned here is kind of assumed to be in the punishment of the Korhites, but their complaint is something different. So it looks like Moses is asking for backup. Basically, like, I need some people to help me out dealing with these Levites, with these Korhites. So tribe of Reuben. Reuben is notably one of the biggest tribes. I believe they may have some military capabilities. So it's kind of like, hey, secret police, not secret police, but hey, warriors, can you come over and give me some backup here? We have a rebellion taking place.
Mhm.
And the two sons go, no, thank you. We're not gonna help you, Moses. You took us from one place, told us we were going to another place, and now we're stuck in the wilderness. We're fed up. Have fun. Deal with it yourself.
Mhm.
So what do you think of their responses there? That it's kind of like, deal with this on your own terms, Moses.
Hmm.
They don't want to be burned alive, do they?
Maybe they don't want to be burned alive. Would there be another reason they don't want to help? Like,
They're mad at him,
yeah.
lost faith in Moses.
Hmm.
You know, it's interesting. Well, Moses is kind of an ordinary man. I mean, he's wise, but so they must kind of wonder how did he get picked? Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I think leadership skills are something you can learn, but yeah, he's fundamentally a semi-ordinary guy who's been thrust into an extraordinary situation, and he's just trying to roll with it here.
Well, he's more confident than, well, he was more confident than he was in the beginning, but still.
Huh. You sort of implied that Moses contacted, what is it, Dathan and Abraham to come help him. Now, I thought he was sort of accused. Yeah, I thought they were part of the sort of rebellion. Aren't they Levites?
That's the thing that I had to look up. They are not Levites. They are
Okay.
from the tribe of Reuben.
Okay.
So that's why I say he's kind of calling for backup here. It's because these are not Levites. This is a different group of people, so it's kind of I'm trying to think of an analogy here. I mean, because they're all like one massive group, but it wouldn't be dissimilar for like the Michigan governor to be like, hey, Governor of Ohio, can you help us out? And them going, we fought a war of Toledo with you. We don't want to help. Like,
I wonder why they weren't more explicit. That it just says Moses sent for it. It doesn't say why.
it doesn't.
And
You're right.
Yeah, it gives absolutely no reason why he sent for it.
Well, apparently Moses didn't know that they were in cahoots right from the beginning with Korah, in that, chapter or the first verse says that they all were together, the three.
Okay. Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
But apparently Moses didn't know that.
Yeah. So I have to say, this is one of the times where the genealogy at the front of the book actually helps, because I flipped over and it actually explains who Elab is, and it is one of the descendants. It actually lays it out that he's a descendant of Reuben. So the genealogies are occasionally useful, even if we tend to skip over them. So if you remember your list of names, you will know that they are from the tribe of Reuben. So theoretically you would remember, but I do think you have a point. Like, it's not overly explicit both why Moses is calling another tribe for help, but also that they are a different tribe.
Mhm.
So from that point, Moses kind of like ignores the Reubenites, where it's like, well, I guess I'm just gonna have to
That's
deal with the
different.
Korhites myself. And that's when he's kind of like, okay, he repeats the information, like, I'm not gonna have backup, so you know what? Just do the thing you're gonna do. Put the incense in the burners and we're gonna see what happens. If it burns, congratulations, you won the argument.
Mhm.
And so he says 250 censers, and Aaron is gonna have Aaron's gonna have his one, and then 250 people are gonna be burning incense alongside him.
Mhm.
So what do you think of this test of 250 people? They are gonna do the holy thing that they want to do, and then the one guy who's technically, there's just one authorized guy who is going to be holding the incense. So is that a fair test to see who is able to do it, and we're just going to see how the incense burns?
Well, it's primarily a test of the Lord.
Mm-hmm. So what would have happened, or just theoretically, what would have happened if everyone burned incense and just everything was okay? Does that mean Aaron's authority would be undermined?
I would think so.
Anybody can burn incense.
Mm-hmm. So notably, this plan is hatched just by Moses. This is one where Moses doesn't actually consult with God about this plan. He kind of just does the leadership thing and says, okay, burn incense if you want to. He invites the Korhites to gather at the tent of meeting to watch them. So starting in verse 18, we see the men start to do the thing where they put the incense, the good smelling herbs and things on the do you know what they are meaning when they're calling it a censer? Like, do you have an image of this? No? Okay.
For that word, I didn't look it up either.
All right, let me draw up an image real quick. So
Is it something that the incense is in, or?
yes, it's a container.
That's
Mhm.
So the ones that we have pictures of today are mostly because they still use them in Catholic and Orthodox churches.
Oh, okay. The same thing.
So basically how it works is there is ones with handles and then ones with chains. And so the one with a handle, well, the basic piece of it is that you have a little bowl here where you will put a hot coal and then your like herb mixture on top of it. So the idea is that it smokes and smolders, but it doesn't flame. And then there is some kind of top piece that has a bunch of holes so that the smoke can rise out of it. The chain is often used so you can like swing it back and forth.
Mhm.
So there's various versions, as you can see. But the concept is all the same. You have the bowl and then the top of it, and it is meant so things burn without burning up. And so they often have like two pieces here, so you can see the inside the little bowl there.
Mhm.
So 250 people have like this little container with a hot coal inside, and they're given some like good smelling stuff to put on top, and then you either like, if it has the handle, you kind of wave it about, or you kind of like swing it around.
Mhm.
And so they take their little incense burners, they put the coal in it, they lay the incense in it, and then they all gather at the tent of meeting, and then God responds to the whole congregation. It says, And what God says is to Moses and Aaron, like, I see what you're doing. You need to step aside and remove yourself from the congregation. So that God's going to consume them in a moment.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, we're done with the 40 years thing. It's not that, well, I'm not waiting 40 years. This is one step too far. I'm just going to burn them all. I'm going to consume everyone. So it sounds like this is where we're getting the sense of like God is being very hot-tempered in this moment once again. But once again, Moses and Aaron kind of like step in between and said, don't punish everyone just because a few people are rebelling. So don't get mad at everyone. This is just a test because a few people are sinning against you. And that's when God kind of like takes a step back and says, okay, then just take a step back from the Korhites, like move back, because we're actually going to have to deal with this rebellion. So I'm going to deal with this situation. Step back. So let's see. And Moses basically goes to like the whole congregation and says, hey, we're going to take a step back from these people, but also like don't touch any of their things, which is interesting because it seems to imply that because this group has sinned or is sinning, that there's that like tactileness to the sin. And so it's like, don't touch their things because it's basically polluted because they are going against the will of God. So don't touch their stuff. And we're just going to sit back and watch and see what happens. And so they go back, they get away from the dwellings of both Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And so all three of them, which are the three leaders who basically snubbed their noses, or Korah, who's causing a rebellion, and then two people who snubbed their noses at helping Moses. And it said that Dathan and Abiram came and stood at the entrance of their tent, along with their wives, their children, and their little ones. So the families are staying with these leaders, and they're not taking a step back. And but the entire congregation is kind of like moving away from them. And laying out this scene so we can talk about like what's actually going on here. Moses then responds as to say, okay, this group of people, they're going to be punished. If they die of natural causes, that's not me. If they die in an extraordinary way, that means God has caused judgment upon these people, and I am correct. And what happens is basically the earth breaks open and just like eats them. Sheol is the term for like the underworld.
Okay.
And so it's basically they don't have a concept of hell like we do today, but it would be like hell breaking open and just eating them alive. And then they're gone. And so what do we think of this exchange of like Moses and Aaron are once again kind of being the intermediary, but we see that the punishment for rebellion is very different than what we've seen in the past. Yeah, Larry?
If you want to be cynical, you could say Moses must have an ulterior motive as well. He says, God, don't kill everybody. Otherwise, who am I going to be leading? You know, you can't kill off all my people. Just take the guilty one.
Moses still wants to be a leader, evidently, and you need to lead people to be a leader.
So they just kill the ones, but doesn't God after that go after some other people too?
We'll get to that in a moment. Yes.
Oh.
There's still more to come, but this is like the initial big action is that basically the earth swallows people up that are guilty.
Yeah. And only the people who were involved in the so-called rebellion are the ones that get killed, but they get wiped out completely.
Right. So is it fair though that their families get consumed alongside them? That's the thing that is interesting to me. It's not just the leaders, it's their children and their wives and their whole family and the little ones.
You're killing off future warriors as well. Future rebellions.
Mhm. Yeah, that's actually, I think you hit it on the money. Like, there's a sense that it's not just punishing the individual, but it's punishing, or it's removing that lineage. That it's like, okay, think of it as kind of like pruning a branch of a tree. If a like a fruit tree has like a sickly branch, it's said that it will create sickly fruit. So you're just gonna cut the branch off, which includes the children. So it seems brutal, but it's the more of an idea of like, can you inherit rebellion? So we're just gonna cut the line off of the tree. Mary Ellen?
If he had allowed the wives and the families to survive, he would be showing mercy. And I don't think that's the message here. I think
Okay.
the message is, you put me in this position and I am going to wipe out this train of thought, and all of its ramifications in the future. And at this moment in time, I am not a merciful God. That would, in this situation, to me, would almost be showing a weakness. Well, if he had only taken the men and the leaders,
Mhm.
that it sets it up for the future that would be their expectation the next time they challenge the Lord, that their families are safe. And for most parents, their primary focus is to protect the wives, to protect the children from harm. So the Lord showed mercy here. In the future, the men could assume that they could rebel again and their families would not be affected.
Hmm.
Mhm.
It's an interesting way to look at it.
Mhm. A mercy killing.
Collateral damage. Is now, when he wipes out these three, are those complete tribes?
So at this point, it's there are sub tribes within the tribe. So most there's like a lineage of leaders, but these groups are considered big enough that like there are subgroups within the overarching tribe.
Okay,
So
this
if
is
you
it's a subgroup then of the tribe. That's-
right. So in this action of like eliminating Dathan and Abrium, God isn't wiping out the Reubenites. He's just wiping out the ruling family of the Reubenites. So theoretically, that would then pass leadership to a different group within the Reubenites, which is kind of why I think the Korhites are assumed to be Levites. I do think that they are supposed to be in that group, and so it's just one group of Levites is taken out. The entire clan is not.
Okay.
All right.
But thinking about, or Mary Ellen, I like the jump that you made of the difference if we're kind of gonna take one step of abstraction from this Bible verse and not think of it as like killing families, but what does it mean to say that an idea, a train of thought, a way of thinking is dangerous and we need to like put an end to this for the collective safety?
Mhm.
Because there are times in history where a group has rebelled and there's an idea that's considered dangerous. And there's some times where it's like put in its place and it's like you end it effectively. And then there's other times where it is seen as merciful just to take out the leadership. And what you see is if you just take out the leadership, they can be turned into a martyr and the idea actually continues. So are there or is there any example that comes to mind of kind of like the ideas and how ideas propagate themselves. Yeah, Mary Ellen? Oh, check your mute, Mary Ellen.
I'm trying to do that to not, whatever. I'm thinking of Nelson Mandela and the situation, I think it was in South Africa. And he was imprisoned and, you know, they tried to wipe out the movement, but they imprisoned him and he became a martyr. And then when he was released, he became a leader. But that's the thing that comes to mind when you ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I mean, the thing is, history is now on Nelson Mandela's side. So
Yeah.
we think of his rebellion as being good and a challenge to power but it is an example of kind of this thing of they made a martyr of him, but then he became the leader of a movement.
Mhm.
That they tried to wipe out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mary?
Fascism would be another one, which hopefully with the defeat of the Nazis, you know, that was wiped out, which it wasn't completely, but at least it was significantly suppressed.
But that didn't start with a rebellion.
So what's interesting is the rise to power of the Nazi regime, which is interesting because one of the things that history always makes is pivots or like stops to make sure of is that initially they attempted to rise in power and they actually lost a series of elections.
Mhm.
And the government thought like, okay, we've stomped that out, and then that actually like codified or like solidified some thinking, and it's actually after the government thought they had dealt with it that it actually ascended.
Mhm.
So after World War II, it's interesting that you see more of a merciless response to it, where there was the trials, and the thought was like, even if like the question was, do we have mercy on soldiers who were following orders?
Yeah.
And the thought was, we actually can't have mercy because this was so bad. Like, we actually need to stamp this out and show that there are consequences to this kind of death and destruction.
Mhm.
I guess that's what Israel is facing right now, you know, is how far they go and getting Hamas separated, if possible, from Palestinians.
Mhm.
It's a tough line to cut.
They're not really trying to, I mean, aren't they just? They're killing an awful lot of civilians.
Yeah, it's
Their use is
to the families.
underneath the hospitals there.
Mhm. Right.
The civilians, you know, had supported it. I mean, they allowed it to become the problem, the threat that it was or is. So it's
Mhm.
tough to draw that line.
And I think this is one of the hard parts of grappling with these thoughts is when it comes to like, what does it take to eliminate an idea that we see as dangerous? And I do think there are dangerous thoughts out there.
Mhm.
That to me feels very different to eliminating people, because at the moment that like we actually look at this this passage and think about the ground swallowing innocent children up, all of a sudden that's when I get very uncomfortable. And like thinking in historical moments of like the difference between punishing Nazi soldiers who were just following orders, who may have been teenagers just caught up in things, versus like punishing the families of Nazi soldiers. Those things feel different and they're messy, and it's, I think, one of the hard things that we still have to grapple with, which is why, Mary Ellen, I like that you kind of, what's the point of this passage versus like what, like if we're going to tie it to history, it's very gruesome.
Mhm. Mhm.
So looking at the time, because I want to get to that question in just a moment. So let's walk through the very end of the chapter, and then we're going to talk about like, what's the point of this? Why is this very gruesome story in here?
Okay.
So the earth breaks open, swallows the Korhites, basically buries them alive. And then like closes over them. It's not just like the earth opens up and they fall into a cavern and it closes right back up. And the assembly that watched this happen, they are terrified that they're going to be swallowed up too. At the same time, there's a fire, so the guys holding incense get consumed in flame. Turns out same thing happened as last time. They didn't have the authority to do the thing that they were doing, and so they're kind of burned up. And the incense holders that they're holding, they basically become holy objects because they are seen as sacrifices on behalf of the congregation. And so they are the sacrifice themselves. And so they, but continuing on, the people then respond and say, Moses and Aaron, it's not God that did this, it's you that are doing this. Like, you are causing even more death and destruction. And there seems to be this break between, like, the people are continually rebelling against what Aaron and Moses are saying, like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But now they are seen as the enemy for putting the rules in place that no one's following.
Mhm.
And then a plague goes out as God once again gets angry and sends a plague. And then Aaron basically runs with his incense burner and basically it's not what you're supposed to do to make atonement, but he kind of just like runs into the mix of it all. And it's like, stop trying to prevent more death. Because he seems to have mercy on these people who is like, they're in hysterics. Let's stop God from murdering more people.
Mhm.
And so that is kind of the story of rebellion, response to rebellion, more rebellion, trying to stop death, and when God is just continuing on a rampage.
Yeah.
So Larry, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I was just troubled by Moses telling Aaron, hey, run out there and make atonement for the people. And Aaron goes out and does it, and God stops the plague. What did Aaron do? I mean, what did he say to God?
So this implies that Aaron is the go-to person to do the sacrifices of atonement. So he's normally the priest that does these sacrifices that kind of, in their sense, it's purging the sinfulness. Therefore, they become holy enough that they're not dying because of being both flawed humans in proximity to God. So theoretically, he's doing a priestly duty that even though the people are actively sinning, he's kind of purging the sin as it's coming up to kind of stop the slaughter. So Aaron is basically just so holy he can run into the mix and like clear away the bad stuff so people stop dying.
Sure.
Does that make more sense?
Yes. Yeah.
It's kind of unclear what he's doing, but it is a role of his priestly duties.
Okay, and God pays attention to it.
Right. It's not him saying words, it's him doing actions more so. So what's the point of all of this? Why is the story here?
I'm wondering if it's God making the point that he's in charge and you can't mess with that. You know, he wants, I don't think this is the same thing as God is God, but he's done that at other times too, that he or she is just in case they forgot, he's in charge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about, this is later, we did with Job. he says, I'm gonna do what I want to do and it's none of your business. It's not the only time that he, it's,
Mhm.
Moses tries to change his mind, but it doesn't last.
Mhm.
Doesn't last.
Yeah.
Uh,
So Marielle and then Larry?
This to me is a response to their challenge of Moses and Aaron and their leadership um, between the two of them. That these people were challenging the leadership. I don't think they were directly railing at God or doing things directly in rebellion to God. They were rebelling against their fellow man and wanting a higher position within the hierarchy of these people that were following Aaron. And so I think this is different from something we've seen before, based on who they're directly challenging. And it's kind of a lesson of, cut it out. These men are my chosen. And this is what's going to happen if you deviate from that understanding or teaching.
Yeah. Larry, did you have a thought?
Yeah, there are two instances here. In the first one, you've got a very vengeful God who opens up the earth, swallows up a bunch of people, and then they're gone. In the second one, he starts doing something similar. He starts a plague, but then Aaron intercedes, and so it's a merciful God. He stops the plague and saves the Israelites.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, there's in a way three responses, because there's the one where the earth opens up, which is direct action. That is God taking an active role in punishment. There's the second one where the people are burned up, and that's almost a passive response where it happened it makes me think of like when a child touches a stove and it's like, ow, that's hot. It's not that like the parent burned them, it's that the child didn't listen and then they were burned. And it's more of the people didn't follow the rules, and this is kind of the consequences of the action they chose. It was just cause and effect. And then the last one is God is taking an active punishment, but then was prevented, and there is mercy involved.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like there's three flavors of punishment, kind of matching the three different categories of conflict here.
There's also the kind of certification of the power of the priests and the incense.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it a little more tangible.
Mm-hmm.
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 Yeah. So if you're in one of the congregations of people that is hearing this, not in the time in the wilderness, but say they're reading from the Torah and you live in Jerusalem, you're going to the temple, and you hear a story like this, what purpose does it serve in that kind of context where you're hearing it not in this place and time, but you're hearing it like centuries after the story takes place? Yeah, Mary Ellen?
Well, in today's vernacular, it would be stay in your own lane. Just stay in your own lane. Don't challenge and try to improve or change your lane. I don't know. That's just the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, Larry?
The bottom line was God saved the Israelites.
Mm-hmm. So there's almost a sense of like, you'll be okay, just don't, like, you need to trust your leaders and don't question the hierarchy. This is all chosen by God, so you just know your place, do your job, and God will save you.
That's right.
Do what you're told.
Mhm. I will say that this text kind of reinforces both hierarchy and an authoritarian mentality. Do what I tell you to do because I told you to do it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
there are times and places for it, and then I think there is sometimes where, or many times where that's not always a good thing.
Mhm.
So we're just gonna wrestle with whether that is the continued idea behind how we're supposed to follow God, is like, this is scripture, and if you don't like it, well, tough tamales, you're gonna face punishment. Or if there's other ways that we can understand our relationship with God.
Mm.
Because I don't think the Bible ever says one thing. I think there's a conversation, and this is one side of the conversation of, here's the rules, if you don't fall in line, you're gonna get burned alive, which is not always comforting. So I know I've held you a little bit long today. Any final thoughts on this scripture?
I was thinking about how many people were burned alive during what we
Position.
all who were deemed to be heretics, or later on that they, like Joan of Arc was burned alive. And then I always wondered why they came up with that. They could have just chopped their heads off or hanged them, but they burned them alive. They did that with the person who wrote King James Bible too, I think. I mean, it just awful. But it had a scriptural support for burning people alive. I think
Mhm.
Yeah.
be awful.
Mhm.
When do we get to the happy part of this book?
Unfortunately, Numbers isn't actually too happy.
Oh.
Yeah, no, Numbers is not an encouraging book. That may be why we skip over it a lot. There is a lot of weighty stories that do have like continued relevance, but we don't often pause on it. And like I said, like, this is actually a story that's referenced a lot in scripture, but I didn't know this story existed until for an exam that I had to do for part of my ordination, in preparation for it, I went from cover to cover through the Bible, and I'm listening to this book, and I'm like, I have never in my life heard this story. And it's dramatic. I mean, literally the earth opens up and swallows people. And I'm like, why was I never told about this? And it's frankly that. It doesn't have a happy message. And so we tend to skip Numbers because it's a lot of grumbling, a lot of punishment.
So I wonder how modern Jews deal with it. They're not burning people up.
No, they are not.
They got space.
Let me send a message to Rabbi Alicia and see if she has a response for us. And
Okay, good.
if she is free in the coming weeks, I might see if there's a time we can chat with her again to kind of grapple with Numbers. Because like I said, it doesn't get much happier from here. And we can kind of think about or ask her how her community understands this, because I think that might, since we don't deal with it a lot, she might have some more tools to think about than we do.
Okay, good, good.
All right.
You know, I wonder if at the time of Jesus, that a lot of those ideas were floating around. Some of Jesus's ideas were floating around in the area, and other people had some of the same ideas. So maybe it would have evolved on its own. I don't know. But love is certainly not, God is love is not one of the that you hear much about in the Old Testament.
The one thing I will say is that Jesus has a wrathful side. If we're paying
Yes.
attention to the parables, we like
Yeah.
to sometimes skip over it, but there is this
Oh,
side.
he got really angry, yeah.
So, but with that, can I pray us out for today?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. God, when we come to you in prayer, I often call you gracious and loving God, because those are the aspects that we want to hold on to. The scripture that we've been going through recently, God, tells a story of you being wrathful and vengeful and harsh. And these scriptures are really hard for us to read and to understand and make sense of, because there's so much dissonance in between these stories and our prayers to you as gracious and loving God. Help us wrestle with these ideas. Help us understand where they belong in our story of faith. Because we see in the world that there are times where there are things that are dangerous, and we do need to respond, and being merciful to some actually causes issues. And so help us wrestle with ideas of mercy and accountability. For humanity often gets that balance wrong because it's really hard to get it right. And so, God, we turn to you always for your guidance and for your love. I ask that you be present with this group as they wrestle with these ideas, and help your wisdom bloom in their hearts so that they may know how to proceed forward and what you call us to do in our lives. So I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
All right.
you.
You,
Yeah.
Thank you all. See you all next week.
Everybody have a great week.
aha.
Yeah.